This is the content section of the video, so click on what you want to watch or let the video run. Here are some performance notes for the Macchi. Getting started in the Macchi cockpit, we'll look down to the lower left and there's a wheel here. This controls the horizontal stabilizer. This effectively moves the entire stabilizer up and down and acts as a pitch trim. And looking up from there, we have the oil radiator. Pulling it back opens it, and then pushing it forward will fully close it. Underneath the oil radiator is the water radiator. See there, that's fully open, and pulling it back will fully close it. Moving on to the throttle. Pulling it all the way towards you is full throttle, and away from you is idle. Then we have manual RPM control. The little switch will flick to the left. Then we can control the RPM. Then we can flick the switch back to the A to bring it on automatic. And you can also move it to the S position, which gives engine boost. Underneath that, we have the flap position indicator and the flap control. And above the flaps is the landing gear handle. Now moving on to the main panel, start the lower left with oil pressure. Above is fuel pressure. Then the electric fuel pump. Then the tachometer. Manifold pressure. The altimeter. The fuel shutoff valve. Then the magnetic compass. Airspeed indicator. Then we have the turn and bank indicator, the vertical speed indicator, the clock, the attitude indicator, and then we have the brakes. Now there's an extra panel underneath the dash we can have a quick look at. Then we have the brake pressure, hydraulic pressure, air cylinder pressure, the pitot heat, and then the ammunition counters. Now shifting our view to the right side, we have the water temperature, oil temperature, and then the landing gear position lights. So green will show down and locked, blank is transition, and red is up and locked. Then you have the oxygen system. Then little knob down there is the tail wheel lock. Pulling it up will lock it, and down is unlocked. And then there's a long gauge running on the side. That's the fuel gauge. Underneath, we get to the cockpit lighting. You can turn that on and off. And then next to that is the navigation lighting, which you can turn on and off as well. Now we'll look at starting the Macchi engine. We just set the throttle to idle, set the oil radiator to closed, and the water radiator to closed, and then we press E to start the engine. Now that the engine's started, we can look at taxiing to the runway and taking off. Maybe have a quick check, make sure the area is clear, add a bit of power, and then we'll start rolling. As you're taxiing towards the runway now, if you've unlocked the tail wheel for taxi, now's the time to make sure it's locked. That way you know the tail wheel is going to be straight for takeoff. When we come to a stop, then we'll go through the before takeoff checklist. So we make sure the canopy is closed. tail wheel is already locked. We set the throttle to idle. Put the oil radiator and the water radiator to fully open. Make sure RPM control is on auto. For our throttle, we're going to gradually increase it to max, and we're going to rotate at 190 kilometers per hour. So we start increasing the throttle to max. The airplane starts rolling. Apply a bit of right rudder to keep the plane straight on the runway. Push forward on the stick and get the tail wheel off the ground. So the plane is going to continue accelerating, keeping it straight on the runway. Getting up to 190 kilometers per hour, we rotate. Get the positive rate of climb, gear comes up. Then we'll start climbing up to traffic pattern altitude and go through the before landing checklist. So we start turning crosswind. We check our position to the runway. Now we'll go over the before landing checklist. Alright, so we want to make sure the tail wheel is locked. When we come on downwind, we're going to get the gear down. Airspeed is going to be about 250 kilometers per hour. Oil and water radiator are both going to be closed, and then once we're abeam the touchdown point, we'll go flaps 10 degrees. As we turn base, we go flaps 25, and we'll use flaps as required on final. Engine final approach speed is going to be about 210 kilometers per hour. Alright, so now we're established on downwind. We'll make sure the oil and water radiator are both closed, and then we set the landing gear to the down position. Then we continue on downwind and check our position. About to be in that touchdown point now, so we'll set the flaps to 10 degrees and reduce a bit of power and begin our descent. We're going to turn base when our touchdown point is at 45 degrees between the wing and the tail. So it's starting to look like it's getting there. We'll begin our turn on base, and we'll continue the descent. Once we're established on base, wings level, get the flaps to 25 degrees. And we always want to be checking our position to the runway to make sure we're not too high or too low at this point. Now we're getting towards wings level, bring the flaps to 25. Another check of the runway position. And then we'll get ready to turn on final. So we start turning towards final. Then once we're established on final, we can evaluate whether we need to add more flaps or adjust our airspeed. But we should come out at about 210, 220 kilometers per hour on final approach. Okay, now we're established on final approach. I want to see the runway. I'm going to shift a little bit to the left. And we do our best to keep our aiming point in the same place in the windscreen. As we're approaching the threshold, we start getting ready to reduce power and start raising the nose to get into the round out and the flare. So we slowly start bringing the power to idle. Bring the nose up to the 3-point position. Touch down on the 3 points, and we hold that back pressure to keep the tail wheel on the ground. Then we can slow down by holding that back pressure and continually applying the brakes, using the rudder to keep the plane straight. And you can retract the flaps. And as you slow down, you can open the canopy and taxi to parking. That's the familiarization video for the Macchi C.202.